Hello and welcome to the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast, which is recorded in the past, technically, isn't it? It's currently halfway in the present and a little bit in the past, but also a little bit in the future, our future, but not their future. In reality, they'll be experiencing this little snippet of the past. And I wonder what people are doing right now, Chris. The 29th of January 2023, it's 16:13, right? 13 minutes past 4, obviously British time. I wonder what they're all doing. Some of them will be asleep I expect. Some of them will be maybe Sunday, so maybe they might be working. I wonder if any of them will be praying.
Oh, that'd be interesting.
Be
Do you mean proper praying, or do you mean like begging some deity to do something?
Oh, begging. Well, praying is kind of begging. I would imagine one or two of them will be a praying. Some of them will be lighting incense and candles to plastic statues. One or two of them might even be doing the flogging style praying, which I always found quite interesting. You know, like the Opus Dei lot, where they get whips and that, and they, oh Lord, I am not worthy, hit themselves with them and that. Chastise themselves, do they call it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is an episode that I made the mistake of asking someone what we should name the episode or what we should do the episode on. I was thinking maybe, we're doing consultations at the moment. I wanted a nice easy topic. As it turns out, we're not going to have a nice easy topic. We're probably going to have one of those head fuck topics. A little bit
That's
of a head
fine. We're due
fuckery
one,
today.
aren't we?
But yeah, we're talking about time. We are due one. It's time for a head fuckery topic. So, fastest witch of them all, what would we like to talk about in regards to time and witchcraft and a magic? Or should I just ask random questions?
You can ask random questions, and then if they're really good, I suppose we could, on the crossover point into the naughty zone, we might be able to add some extra bonus stuff that we weren't normally going to talk about. But I'm thinking we might be able to squeeze that in.
The naughty zone. Oh, I think we should start referring to it as the naughty zone instead of the watershed. I think that's way more exciting. Right.
Okay.
First question is that many ceremonial magicians and people that work in a ritualistic style setting for magical purposes, they often talk about time displacement and time slowing down and changing whilst in a ritual. For example, famous examples include from other magical practitioners of the past when you're doing it, you're casting your little Wiccan circle. All right, yeah. Or you're doing some sort of, one of those lesser ℍ𝕠𝕝𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣 type shits. There's a triangle and a circle involved. Either way, there's some various shapes involved and calling out and wand waving and such. And what happens is all the clocks around where the wand wavings happen, around the circle and the geometric shapes and that, they all just stop, Chris. Whereas all the ones that are further outside of the circle and various, around the house or the building, they all carry on going. Does time just stop? What up with that? How does these rituals affect mechanical clocks and time? Is it just the clocks there are stopping, or is it the actual time there are stopping?
Well, it depends on how accomplished the practitioner is. I guess is going to be my elitist answer. But a more in-depth answer would be the case of there is a certain amount of time bending within a confined space. So it doesn't mean lots of people think about kind of bending time. They think of Superman, don't they? And they think of the whole world experiencing this. Whereas because obviously time is a constraint, a constraint. No, why can't I say the word right? Yeah, constraint of three-dimensional living. So it's a resistance point of that kind of experience of pushing into the fourth, which is what we do a lot of the time as practitioners is kind of blurring that line between the third and fourth dimension. Kind of means that actually you can experience the lack of time or time stopping without it impacting anybody else around you. And I think most people don't think of time as this kind of liquid, that kind of fluid state that can have something doing over here that isn't going on in the rest of the world.
Yes, time is a word, like the word love, but you wouldn't want to fuck your grandmother, would you? But you still love her, because it's a different type of love. The love you might have for a spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, versus grandma or granddad. It's a different type of love, isn't it? Right? Now, I think what people confuse is they think time and they think one very specifically, that time is time. And I think that time is a word, and we need to think about why we're using that word and how we use that word. Because time, many people say time doesn't exist, when in reality here, in this physical plane, time does actually exist. It's actually a thing.
Yes.
It is a thing. But it's also a perception as well, kind of like a lens. So the way we perceive time and the way that we measure time and time itself in terms of the laws of physics or the laws of reality here, I think those three things are technically different, but we still use the same word to describe them. Yeah.
So to go proper basics and answer your question again, now that they've had that mind expanding process go on, to answer your question simply, it would be a case of, well, the clock may appear to stop. One, that is your perception of that stopping. The second part is the clock is constant. The clock is timed in that kind of constant way in the third dimension. So you moving into that kind of fourth shift doesn't mean that that's going to stop going forward. The difference is your perception of it stopping, in quote unquote marks, is a perception thing. So therefore it stopped, but it only stopped for you.
I've worked in jobs where I've looked at the clock and I get off at 11:30, and yet 29 minutes past 11, it feels like fucking hours, right? Now, is that the fact that the time has just stopped, or is that just my perception of watching the clock? A minute really does feel like multiple minutes.
Yeah.
So perception or magic? Perception, magic. The magic of perception or something else?
All of the above. The biggest part will always be your perception of time, is how your brain is processing, because for you that's your experience of it. That's why on a good day, when they say, what is it? What's that thing people say about fun and time? My brain won't work today.
Fun and time. Oh,
yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun.
That's the one I was after. So in that instance, it is, you're enjoying the reality of something, therefore it speeds up. I find when I'm listening to music, time flies faster. The main reason for that is you're involved in that kind of sensory experience, and therefore you're not watching time. What's that one they say about kettles? A watched kettle never boils, or something like that.
A watched kettle never boils.
Yeah,
I've never heard that one.
It's talking about that if you're focused on something, time goes really, really slow.
I've noticed this when I get people to do dead hangs in the gym, where they have to hold and hang from a bar only for a minute. Oh my gosh, or a plank. It feels like hours. They often tell me, but I've used a mechanical device that tells me and it does the counting, so I'm not even counting slow. like 1 Mississippi, a P, 2 Mississippi, a P. Like that's a little bit longer, adds
Yeah.
extra minutes on the end. But no, proper mechanical timer, little stopwatch like. And it is only a minute, but it does feel like a lot more than a minute. Okay, sometimes I don't tell them when the minute's gone. I just see how long they can last for. But I'm like that. Do you think time's like that, Chris?
But yeah, it's your perception of it. Like for me, I love public speaking. So for me, the adrenaline's rushing, and therefore you're like, oh shit, I've just done 20 minutes of talking. I was only supposed to talk for 15. And then everybody else who kind of like shits themselves when they're going to have to speak publicly, those 15 minutes are the hours long because they're so freaked out by it, because their heart's pumping, and therefore the time between each, because obviously I think it's safe to say that there is a lot to do in this physical realm with the speed of your heartbeat and how you perceive time. I think as your heart rate starts to race, it impacts your understanding of time in the same way that normally what's going on at that same time is adrenaline is rushing in some way, shape, or form. So I think those combinations of things skew your experience of time because of what's going on with you physiologically.
I personally can't relate. I never ramble on about anything.
Oh, sure. That's why you have an entire series called Ramblings, yeah?
Yeah, but they're also less than an hour. Anyway, so what about this thing, like where there's a magic and such that's linked to time? Because astrology is kind of linked to alignments and that, right? And you can see that there's alignments with planets and comets and all that jazz, right? But there's a lot of urban legends, and if you believe half of the horror films, the devil comes a visiting at 3 minutes past 3 o'clock in the morning or something, don't it? Or there's a witching hour and stuff. That's not really linked to a specific planetary alignment. That's linked to the clock, isn't it? And the clock varies. So it ain't like the devil turns up. You got to wait until what, 3 o'clock in the morning or something? What up with that?
So there is a mixture of ways of kind of looking at it, which is that there's again, it comes down to this thing, perception. But so there are socially known, I'm going to use this term very loosely, facts, which is where something has a tendency to. So like, what's that common? Like you're more likely to be struck by lightning in a red car. And you just kind of like, well, the reason for that is there are more red cars. But the experience hasn't changed. People just remember there are more people that have had accidents in red cars or have had a certain occurrence happen in red cars. So all they remember is that part. Like with how we forget why we hang horseshoes up, is that kind of like it's part of that cultural social memory, and therefore has a reaction to you. So like, the witching hour being at 3 a.m. is one of those things that will have been based on, there are enough stories that have talked about it, so then that itself becomes a trope, and they have to use that trope when they create a new movie or a new story, because it's a commonly accepted fact that's
like
when
nursery
those things happen.
Like nursery rhymes. A lot of people make up bullshit about the origin of nursery rhymes. Like ring around a rosy, pocket full of posy, and all that about the plague, when this is not. That's bullshit. It's nothing to do with the plague or nothing, because that was around before the plague came along, and that they can prove it by science and that. I know I watched a documentary about telling me about nursery rhymes that were to do with the plague, and I watched another one that was about nursery rhymes that weren't to do with the plague, and that all these documentaries that talk about nursery rhymes to do with the plague are all bullshit. Fascinating. Anyway, I can't remember where I was going with this, but we'll carry along the thing with nursery rhymes and that you'll hear about people talk about oh, 3 o'clock in the morning, you see, that's the witches. The witches' hour at 12 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning for the demons' hour. That's just because, you know, all of those witches, witchcraft being illegal, you had to go and creep into the woods when everyone else was asleep and that. You know, we know this because of such and such, such and such. And the smugglers used to do it in the dead of night and all this sort of thing. It was like, well, there's some anecdotal evidence towards that. But really, I tend to think that an asshole's an asshole for multiple reasons, not just one. And that this whole thing about 3 o'clock in the morning being a somewhat magical or sinister time is probably more than just one reason, I would guess.
Yeah, I would say probably my thoughts have always been the witching hour is there because it's a chat about thresholds. So some people will say midnight, others will say 3, and the difference being is that midnight has that kind of it's not today, it's tomorrow threshold, and the 3 a.m. is normally that strange time between the night time and dawn, because somewhere about there will be that crossover, you know, it'll be that threshold time. It's like the concept of all dancing naked on a full moon. Well, you wouldn't do it on a new moon, would you? Because you wouldn't be able to enjoy seeing each other without having lots of lights. So it makes more sense for gatherings to be on the full moon because you don't have to take a light source with you, and the night is clear. Like, you know, there are all these parts of it that it'll always go back to the same thing, Liam, that we constantly talk about, which is survivalist process and magic.
And logic.
Logic dictates that you would do it that time because that would be the most available time. So to go kind of back to the idea,
dark moon, Chris, dark moon, doing the bad stuff on the dark moon, because then you don't want them to see you, do you?
Exactly.
No.
You know, like those aren't that, you know, that's a natural alignment. And I think the reason I wanted to go back to what you said about astrology is you already, because you can't not say it that way, is it's not about time, it's about alignment, which are very different. So astrology is all about these goal times, and the whole picture of a natal chart and exploring a natal chart is about trigger points. It's about times at which these things will align, and therefore the outcome will most likely be X, is all based on that concept of alignment. People talk about it as time, but we're not talking about time. That's why all the great kind of seers of the olden days used to say, when the such and such happens, this will happen. That's why all those amazing kind of movie spells are like on a blood moon or whatever, is because there is normally that kind of timing aspect that's applied. Is not about time. It's not this will happen 2 years from now. It'll be when this blood moon returns, or such and such conjunction occurs, is because that's the only way to really pinpoint a time period accurately, would be to say when this certain phenomena returns and happens. You know, when you look at a natal chart and we talk about things like Saturn's return, it is a very specific period that's based on where Saturn was when you were born. You know, we're coming back to when that then aligns again, the chaos will ensue, or the good thing will happen, is based on that fact of we're waiting for that alignment to return. Because actually the only way you can really measure time is movement.
Now, let's be controversial here, okay? Because I have certain feelings towards this topic, and I don't know what evidence there is for it, but I know that there are some practitioners that side with me and others that don't. I want to see if you side with me or not. Is the witching hour the middle of the night, or is the witching hour the middle of the night? i.e., is the witching hour when the clock goes 00.00 12 a.m., or is it the middle of the night? So when it starts getting dark, sunset, then sunrise, directly between that, which obviously isn't necessarily 12 o'clock at night, is it? What would you say the witching hour is?
Well, I think I've already agreed with you a few minutes ago when I explained why those two things are there, is that it's about threshold. So if you're going for the middle of the night or midnight, it should be between sunrise and I went to say sunfall. That's a weird one.
I like a sunfall.
You know? So yes, I don't think it's not difficult. You've got to remember, as far as we remember, pre-clock, the middle of the night was anywhere between. So actually, you would base that based on, where a certain celestial body was, or whatever was visible, or where the moon was, if you could see it, was that where you would calculate the middle of the night, because you won't be able to go and check your watch. I think nowadays we've aligned everything with what our idea of time is.
Yeah.
Even
when it's wrong. And they just very wrong. Calendar, don't they, a little bit?
Yeah.
Oh, things are starting to go awry. I know. We'll go back we'll go back an hour, or we'll go forward an hour, or what have you. Oh, it winds me right up. Especially the one where I get less time in bed.
Well, the thing is, technically you don't. No. But it's all this need to standardize things. And I don't feel like you would need to standardize anything. I suppose in the modern world now, where people do rituals via webcam, I suppose you do need to know exactly what time you're going to meet up. Whereas in the olden days, we would just say,
rural, I'll pop by later.
Yeah.
Where in city life, you have to give them like a specific time, don't you? It's all buzz in the city. In a rural area, it's all quite slow, isn't it? Now, have you heard of this concept of pagan time? And is it being used as an excuse to show up late for talks and workshops and such, yeah? Where the fuck does that come from?
Again, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? So, people that tend to walk around in velour all day and wear unnecessarily amounts of patchouli are not really caring about time, because they tend to be slovenly individuals or free-thinking folk, which I think is what the other tried to call them. Means that, yes, culturally, it's now acceptable for pagans to be late. This concept of pagan time, which you've only really heard, I suppose, about in the last kind of 10 years, but it's culturally, within their culture, is considered to be pagan time. But I'm of the feeling, anyway, that I've always used the term fashionably late. I arrive exactly when I intend to arrive, not a moment before.
Whereas I just don't give a shit.
So
turn up. I tend to dislike being early for things. Don't know if you've noticed. I dislike being early for things. So what I tried to do is I tried to time things so if I have to meet someone at 12, I meet someone for 12. And there's always traffic and stuff, but I would much rather get there at 12 or a little bit late than early. I don't like being early.
I don't particularly like being early. The only thing I'm ever early for are kind of interviews. But that's more out of a panic.
Okay.
Of the, something is guaranteed to go wrong when you need to be somewhere. Or like if you're after, trying to get to a train, suddenly that's when chaos will ensue. And the buses won't turn up, or something won't turn up, or there's loads of traffic. When you need to be somewhere, that's exactly when, you're most likely to not be there on time because something's gone wrong. Those are the days that I prepare purely by going early. So there's a margin of error.
Now, as a magical practitioners and such, we obviously travel and experience things outside of time, and also in places and experience things where time is not as, let's say, strict, right? So we've experienced eternities and such like that before, you know, that kind of thing. However, from a logical perspective, when teaching, I tend to find we need to shift people's view from time to solids, how solid something is, right? So
Yes.
when I think about, if I'm going, you and me, right, if we're going to go to some water park, right, and we're going to go down a log flume ride, yeah, if we go down that log flume ride, say we're halfway down the log flume ride, right, we're now only really experiencing the thing that we're experiencing in the present. We know that we're going to get to the bottom of the log flume ride, but we haven't got there yet. And we know we've been at the top of the log flume ride, and we remember waiting for a little bit as well. Now, people put, I think, more emphasis on the past as being solid. So because they remember and have a memory of waiting in line and queuing to get on the log flume ride, getting in the little blow up boat or whatever, or dinghy or whatever it is, and then going down and then experiencing the adrenaline of what they're currently doing, which is halfway down the log flume ride. They put more emphasis on that past being solid. And the future is really rather solid also. The fact that they're going to get to the bottom of that without really much altering gravity. But people don't think of life like that. People don't think of things like that. And I notice that when people plan spell work specifically, or people plan magical rituals and such like that, they don't take into account of the solidity of the and nature of the work and the energy that they're using, and particularly what they're trying to affect, right? You notice this, or is it just me?
Yeah, there's the I'm trying to think how I put it.
Because humans are used to the past, and they think the past is
Yeah.
not changeable and very solid, but they don't see this future as being solid either. They see it as a great uncertainty. I don't think psychics and witches really view the future as uncertain. What I think we tend to experience things and see things from a psychic level is how solid an outcome is, and how heavy you can lift, how much, you know, what solid thing can you get over or destroy or break or alter, that kind of thing, which we obviously understand. Getting that through to the beginners is really, really, really difficult. But anyway, we're about to go over to extra time, actually.
Yeah.
So
I normally explain that one by trying to distinguish between fate and destiny.
yeah.
And that's about the only way that I can really explain that. But again, it goes back to perception, but I'll talk to that when we cross that threshold into naughty zone, I guess.
Oh, does that mean we're going to get to talk about the fates in Naughty Zone?
We can do if you so wish.
Oh, good. Because there's fates, but there isn't necessarily destinies. Is there three destinies? I've not heard of three destinies. I've heard of the spear of destiny. But yeah, we're gonna have that conversation about the difference between destiny and fate and all that jazz. But anyway, that's it for the regular edition of the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. You can tune in to the extended edition by going to the Thoth Mystery School website, I think now. Oh yay, if you're not already there. Right, so we're in extra time. I suppose let's start with, we're talking time and such, greater, lesser times. What the fuck is the difference between fate and destiny? Because most people get very funny and look down on those that do not understand that fate and destiny may be different things.
Yeah, so it differs from kind of culture to culture. and kind of, you know, different people explain it different ways. I like to oversimplify the matter because I think that's easier to